You ever have someone just vanish from your life like they hit an invisible eject button? No warning, no explanation, just gone. Here's the part nobody tells you. It's not random. There's a psychological pattern behind these disappearances, and once you see it, it'll make you look at people completely differently. So let's break this down using some ideas from Carl Jung, the guy who loved digging into the parts of the mind most people pretend don't exist. Most sudden disappearances don't start with some dramatic moment. They start quietly, way before anything looks off. It's like a slow internal build-up happening behind someone's expressionless face while you're just living your life, assuming things are steady. Here's what's actually going on. Some people carry around tension they've never learned to navigate. It's not the kind of tension that comes from the outside world. It's the kind that comes from their own internal expectations, unresolved conflicts, or the pressure to maintain a version of themselves they can't keep up with forever. From your perspective, everything seems calm. Conversations seem normal, interactions feel fine, nothing dramatic is happening. But inside them, it's a silent countdown. They're feeling overwhelmed, but not in a way they can articulate. Half the time, they don't even understand it themselves. They just know something is tightening. They start interpreting everyday situations as heavier than they actually are. They start feeling like they're being pushed, even when nobody's pushing them. And because they've never built up the internal tools to release that pressure gradually, talk about it, acknowledge it, deal with it, they let it build until the only escape valve they know is to step out completely. To you, it looks like a sudden exit. To them, it feels like the only move they could make without mentally imploding. And here's the part that catches people off guard. This pressure isn't about you. You're not the trigger. You're just the nearest person when their internal system hits overload. Their vanishing act is an attempt to get away from the discomfort inside them, not from anything you did on the outside. Carl Jung had this concept he called the shadow. Basically, the parts of yourself you'd rather pretend don't exist. Not dramatic, evil stuff. Just the traits you don't want to admit you have. Impatience, insecurity, impulse, fragility. All the stuff people shove into a mental basement and hope nobody opens the door to. Here's where it gets interesting. When someone suddenly disappears from your life, it's often because they accidentally brushed up against their own shadow. Something about a situation, a conversation, or even just a moment of honesty triggers a glimpse of these buried traits. And instead of saying, "Yeah, that's me, I need to deal with that," they panic. It's like their mind flashes a warning. You're getting too close to the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. And a lot of people don't have the skill or the courage to face that. So they hit the exit. Not to avoid you, but to avoid themselves. Jung believed that people spend enormous energy maintaining a polished version of who they think they should be. The shadow is the exact opposite of that version. So when those hidden traits start leaking through the cracks, some people feel exposed, vulnerable, uncomfortable in a way they can't explain. And here's the twist most people never consider. Their disappearing act isn't a response to something you revealed about them. It's a response to something they noticed about themselves. That's why the exit happens so abruptly. There's no warm-up, no final conversation, no explanation. You can't explain something you don't fully understand yourself. They're running from an internal collision, not an external conflict. And when you realize that, the whole thing stops feeling like a rejection and starts looking more like someone dodging their own reflection. A lot of people think sudden disappearances come from some big, dramatic emotional event. The truth? For many people, disappearing is just their default response. A habit they've practiced for years without even realizing it. Avoidance isn't something people consciously choose. It's something they slip into because it feels familiar, safe, predictable. It's the one move they feel confident they won't mess up, because it requires zero confrontation, zero clarity, and zero vulnerability. Think about someone who never learned how to deal with tension head-on. Maybe they grew up in environments where expressing discomfort wasn't an option. Maybe they were taught that the safest way to get through a difficult moment was to stay quiet, step back, or just remove themselves entirely. Over time, that pattern becomes muscle memory. So when they hit a moment, any moment, that feels even slightly overwhelming, their mind doesn't say, "I should talk this out." It says, "Get out of here right now." Not because they're trying to hurt anyone, not because they think disappearing is the right thing to do, but because avoidance is the only coping method they've ever relied on consistently. And here's where it gets even more strange. People who rely on avoidance often don't recognize they're avoiding anything. They think they're just giving themselves space or resetting. They don't see the ripple effect their disappearance creates because they've trained themselves not to stay long enough to witness the fallout. They're not problem solvers. They're problem evaders. And the moment something internal feels sharp, heavy, or confusing, their mind triggers a mental fire alarm. Except instead of putting out the fire, they just leave the building. Their exit isn't a strategy. It's a reflex. And reflexes don't come with explanations. They just happen. Carl Jung had another idea that lines up perfectly with why some people disappear out of nowhere: the persona. Think of the persona as the polished version of someone, the version they want the world to see. Confident, collected, capable, in control. Whatever image they've decided is acceptable, that's the one they're performing. But here's the catch. The persona isn't who they actually are. It's the presentation, the highlight reel, the edited cut. And maintaining that version of themselves takes effort, sometimes way more effort than they let on. Now imagine someone who's been holding up that persona for years, maybe even decades. They've invested so much into it that any tiny slip feels like a full-on collapse. Not because the slip is big, but because their identity is balancing on it like a shaky table. Then something happens. Maybe a moment where they're more honest than they intended, or they react in a way that doesn't match their carefully built image, or you notice something in them they didn't expect you to catch. Suddenly, they feel the persona crack. And that crack? It's not just uncomfortable. To them, it's catastrophic. Because the moment someone sees behind that polished version, even for a second, they feel exposed. Not in a dramatic or cinematic sense, exposed in a psychological sense. As in, if they see this part of me, then everything I've built might fall apart. And when people feel that exposure, they have two choices: face it or flee it. A surprising number choose the second. Disappearing becomes a way to protect the persona at all costs. It's easier to vanish and reset their image somewhere else than to stay and risk someone seeing the unpolished version of who they are. It's not about escaping others. It's about escaping the possibility that someone might see the version of themselves they've tried to hide. This is one of the reasons sudden exits happen so abruptly. There's no warning, no build-up on the outside, just an internal realization. My persona can't hold up here. And the moment that realization hits, they're gone. You've probably heard people talk about fight or flight. What almost nobody talks about is the third response, the one that quietly explains a massive number of sudden disappearances: the freeze. The freeze response isn't dramatic. It doesn't look emotional. It doesn't look panicked. From the outside, it looks like nothing. But internally, it's a complete shutdown of their system. Here's how it works. Some people experience intense emotional overload without showing it. They don't argue. They don't react. They don't express anything. Instead, their mind hits a point where it decides the whole situation, internal or external, is too much to process at once. And when that threshold is crossed, the system goes silent. They mentally disconnect. They stop engaging. They pull their energy inward. And in that mental fog, disappearing feels like the simplest path. The freeze response doesn't consider explanations or closure. It doesn't consider impact. It's not thinking long-term, and it's definitely not thinking logically. It's just trying to shut out anything that feels overwhelming. It goes something like this. A moment hits. Something feels too sharp, too heavy, or too revealing. Their mind says, "I can't handle this," and instead of working through it, they mentally power down. And once they shut down emotionally, physical withdrawal becomes the next step. This is why sudden exits often feel so bizarrely clean. No argument, no build-up, no visible sign something was wrong, just an abrupt disappearance. It's not calculated, it's not cold, it's not even intentional in the way most people think. It's a reflexive retreat into numbness, an instinctive attempt to escape anything that feels like too much. And the strangest part? People in a freeze state rarely even have the words for what they're doing. If you asked them to explain their exit at the moment it happened, they couldn't. They're not avoiding explanation. They literally don't have access to it. Their mind shut the lights off before they even made the decision. The freeze response is the most misunderstood reason people disappear, because it looks calm, but it's actually total overload. Here's the thing about sudden disappearances. They hit hard, really hard. And that's because our brains automatically make it personal. Your mind immediately goes to, what did I do wrong? Did I say something? Did I somehow push them away? It feels like a direct reflection of your value. But here's the truth. Most of the time, it has almost nothing to do with you. Why? Because the reasons we've been talking about, the pressure buildup, the shadow, avoidance, the persona cracking, the freeze response, they're all internal. They live entirely inside the person who vanished. Their exit is about their own mind, not your actions or worth. Think of it this way. You're the nearest thing in the physical world, while all this mental chaos is happening inside them. You're standing there, totally unaware, while their internal system hits overload. And when that system reacts, it looks to you like a personal attack. But it's just a coincidence of timing. Jung would say it's a matter of projection. You're interpreting their flight through your own lens, naturally. Humans do this all the time. It's hardwired. We assume we're the cause of sudden shifts in other people's behavior, but in reality, you're just witnessing the stage where their internal drama plays out. So the next time someone disappears suddenly, remember, the sting you feel is real, but the blame is misplaced. Their exit is a mirror of their inner world, not a report card on you. And once you start seeing it this way, it changes everything. Suddenly, the abruptness isn't humiliating, it's illuminating. Now here's where things get really interesting. If you've followed along, you know there's a lot going on behind the scenes when someone disappears. Pressure, avoidance, persona cracks, freeze responses. It's a lot. And it's easy to take it personally. But here's the Jung-inspired reframe. Their exit isn't about you. It's about their inner conflict, the parts of themselves they haven't integrated, the tension they can't manage, the versions of themselves they aren't ready to face. Jung would say that every person has these hidden layers, and sometimes the layers push them to act in ways that seem confusing or hurtful. Their sudden disappearance is a sign of their unresolved inner work, not a judgment on your value. Think about it like this. If someone vanishes, it's a signal, not a verdict. It's a glimpse into their inner chaos, their inability to handle the pressure, their struggle to reconcile who they are with who they want to appear to be. When you reframe it this way, the sting starts to fade. You stop ruminating over what you did wrong and start seeing the exit as a reflection of their psychology, not your worth. It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. You move from confusion and hurt to clarity and understanding. And here's the kicker. Once you start seeing disappearances through this lens, suddenly nothing about them seems random. You start noticing patterns, not just in others, but in yourself. How you react, how you cope, what pressures you tolerate. That's where Jung really shines, teaching us that understanding others is also a path to understanding ourselves. So the next time someone vanishes without warning, you don't just shrug and wonder why. You step back and recognize the signs of internal conflict playing out. You see the psychology behind the exit. And that's power. Some people disappear suddenly because they've been trapped by perfectionism. Not just the "I like things neat" kind, but the kind where every action, every word, every choice feels like it's under a microscope. Imagine someone at work who always presents themselves as calm, collected, and on top of things. On the outside, everything seems fine. On the inside, their brain is running a full-on audit. Am I saying the right thing? Will this idea get judged? What if I fail? The pressure builds slowly, almost invisibly. Each small interaction adds weight. Each expectation, whether real or self-imposed, becomes a stone in a backpack that's already overloaded. And here's the twist. When perfectionism hits that breaking point, the easiest way out is disappearance. They stop replying to messages. They skip meetings. They retreat from visibility entirely. Not because they're lazy or careless, but because the act of staying present feels impossible. Example. Someone leading a project might have everything ready on paper, but suddenly stop attending check-ins. They're terrified that any mistake, even a tiny one, will expose the cracks in the persona they've worked so hard to maintain. Vanishing is their escape hatch. Another example. A colleague who always contributes ideas in brainstorming sessions may suddenly go quiet. Their internal critic is screaming, "None of this is good enough. Everyone will see I'm not as capable as I should be." Disappearance becomes a defense mechanism. Jung would say this is the shadow meeting the persona, the hidden, self-critical part of them colliding with the polished version they project. And when that clash happens, retreating can feel safer than facing the inner conflict. So, when someone vanishes seemingly without reason, it's often not about you. It's about their internal battle with the impossible standards they've set for themselves. And here's the kicker. Perfectionists aren't always aware of the pattern themselves. They don't plan to disappear. They just reach their limit and take the exit that feels safest. It's a trap. And the exit is their way of coping. Another major reason people disappear suddenly? They're drowning in expectations, sometimes their own, sometimes the world's. Picture this. Someone is assigned to a high-stakes project, maybe a presentation or a team initiative. On the surface, they appear calm, handling tasks like everything is under control. But internally, their mind is spinning. If I fail, if I miss something, if I let someone down, everything could collapse. That pressure starts building incrementally. Every new task, every new responsibility, every passing minute adds more weight. Their brain can only juggle so much before the mental load becomes unbearable. And here's where it gets interesting. Unlike pressure that can be addressed through conversation or planning, this kind of pressure is invisible to everyone else. You see someone smiling, joking, participating, but inside, it's a mental avalanche. Example. A co-worker who normally contributes ideas in meetings suddenly stops. No emails, no updates. They pull back completely. From your perspective, it looks abrupt, maybe even careless. But internally, they're hitting a tipping point. The weight of expectations feels like too much, and vanishing becomes the only way to regain control. Another example. Imagine someone juggling multiple responsibilities at work while trying to maintain a perfect outward image of competence. One small critique, one unexpected challenge, or even a minor misstep can feel catastrophic. The only response they've learned to rely on? Disappearance. It's the quickest way to escape overload without confronting the pressure directly. Jung would say this is an interplay between the persona, the polished, capable self they show the world, and the shadow, the vulnerable, anxious, overwhelmed self they keep hidden. The collision of the two triggers a mental overload, and retreating suddenly feels like the only option. So, when someone disappears in the middle of high expectations, it's rarely about you. It's about their internal pressure hitting a limit they didn't know how to manage. And the exit? It's a coping mechanism, messy, abrupt, but instinctive. The takeaway: noticing this pattern can save you from internalizing blame, and it can even help you anticipate when someone in high-pressure environments might hit their breaking point. Here's an interesting twist. Sometimes sudden disappearances happen not individually, but in group settings. And it's surprisingly common. Picture a brainstorming session, a team meeting, or a collaborative project. Everyone's sharing ideas, debating, building momentum. Then one person, who's been active and engaged, suddenly goes quiet. Over the next few days, they pull back completely. No messages, no input, no visibility. From the outside, it seems abrupt and confusing. But Jung would point to the same underlying dynamics: the persona versus the shadow, combined with internal pressure. In a group, the stakes feel amplified. The person feels exposed, their competence judged, their vulnerabilities potentially visible. And when their internal critic spikes, vanishing becomes a protective instinct. Example: a colleague who is usually confident in meetings might suddenly stop volunteering ideas after a small comment challenges one of their contributions. Internally, their mind is running, "If they see this mistake, they'll see me differently. I can't handle this." Instead of pushing through, they retreat completely, disappearing from participation. Another example: someone leading a group project might stop communicating with teammates after receiving subtle criticism. They haven't disappeared because they dislike the team. They've disappeared because the collision between expectations, internal pressure, and their perceived image feels unbearable. This pattern repeats because the exit feels safer than facing exposure, even temporarily. The group environment amplifies the risk of the shadow leaking through the persona, and the easiest solution they've learned? Vanish. The key insight: disappearances in group settings aren't personal attacks. They're protective responses. By observing these patterns, you can start recognizing the warning signs and, more importantly, stop internalizing blame.